The distant thunder of hooves echoed through the New Mexico territory as Willow Lane clutched her stomach, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, and a child growing inside her that would bring nothing but shame in the eyes of proper society. It was 1875, and an unmarried woman with child might as well have branded herself with a scarlet letter. The sun blazed mercilessly overhead as Willow stumbled along the dusty trail leading away from Albuquerque. The town had been her home for barely 6 months before her condition became impossible to hide any longer. The boarding house owner had thrown her belongings onto the street that very morning, condemning her as a woman of loose morals, unfit to live among decent folk. "Get yourself gone before sundown," Mrs. Hollister had hissed. "We don't harbor your kind here." Willow's legs trembled beneath her as she walked. 20 years old and alone in the world, she had come west after her parents' death, seeking a new beginning as a schoolteacher. Now that dream lay shattered at her feet, like the pieces of her broken heart. The approaching rider slowed his horse as he neared. Willow kept her eyes fixed on the ground, quickening her pace despite her exhaustion. Men on horseback rarely meant good news for women traveling alone. "Miss, you all right out here in this heat?" The voice was deep but gentle. Willow hesitated, then glanced up. The man sat tall in his saddle, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the cloudless sky. A wide-brimmed hat shaded his face, but she could see the concern in his eyes. "I'm fine, sir," she lied, her voice betraying her with a slight quaver. He dismounted in a fluid motion that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. "You don't look fine, if you don't mind my saying so." He approached slowly, as one might a spooked horse. "Preston Irwin," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Most folks just call me Prees." "Willow Lane," she replied automatically, then bit her lip, regretting giving her real name. "Miss Lane, there's nothing but open country for 20 miles. Where are you headed?" She had no answer for him. "Nowhere. Anywhere. Just away." When she didn't respond, his gaze dropped briefly to her midsection where her shawl had slipped, revealing the small but unmistakable swell of her belly. His expression didn't change, didn't harden with judgment as she expected. "You need help," he stated simply. "I don't need charity," she said, though she knew it wasn't true. She had less than $5 to her name and no prospects. "It's not charity to help a person in need." He gestured to his horse. "My ranch is about an hour's ride from here. You could rest, have something to eat." "Why would you help me?" Suspicion crept into her voice. She'd learned the hard way that men rarely offered assistance without expecting something in return. Preston Irwin's weathered face softened. "Because my mama raised me right," he said simply. "And because no one should be alone when they're carrying a child." When Willow still hesitated, he added, "I've got a housekeeper, Mrs. Morales. Been with my family since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. You'd be perfectly proper under her watchful eye." The mention of the housekeeper eased some of Willow's fears. She glanced back toward Albuquerque, then down the empty road ahead. What choice did she really have? "I can walk alongside," Preston offered, sensing her reluctance to ride with a stranger. "No," she said finally. "I'll ride if you're sure." He helped her onto his horse with careful hands, then swung up behind her, maintaining a respectful distance as he took the reins. "I won't let any harm come to you, Miss Lane," he said quietly as they set off. "You have my word on that." The words were simple, spoken without drama, but something in his voice made Willow believe him. For the first time since discovering her condition 3 months ago, she felt the smallest flicker of hope. Preston's ranch sat nestled in a valley, surrounded by rolling hills covered with scrub brush and dotted with juniper trees. A 2-story wooden house stood proudly at the center of the property, its wide porch offering shelter from the relentless New Mexico sun. Several outbuildings, a corral with horses, and a bunkhouse completed the homestead. As they approached, an older Mexican woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her sharp eyes took in the scene: Preston on horseback with a young woman, and her eyebrows rose questioningly. "Mrs. Morales," Preston called as he helped Willow down from the horse. "This is Miss Lane. She needs a place to stay for a while." Mrs. Morales assessed Willow with a glance that seemed to take in everything: her travel-stained dress, her exhausted face, and the slight roundness beneath her shawl. But there was no condemnation in her expression, only a kind of resigned understanding. "Come inside, Nina," she said, taking Willow's arm. "You look ready to drop." Preston handed his horse's reins to a ranch hand who had appeared from the stables. "Get her settled, please," he said to Mrs. Morales. "I've got to check on the new calves with Miguel, but I'll be back for supper." Willow was led into a house that was surprisingly comfortable for a bachelor rancher. The furniture was solid and well made, with cushioned chairs and clean surfaces. Mrs. Morales took her to a small but pleasant bedroom on the ground floor. "Rest," the housekeeper instructed. "I'll bring you some water to wash and then something to eat." Left alone, Willow sank onto the bed, her body aching with fatigue. She had been so focused on getting away from Albuquerque that she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge how utterly exhausted she was. Tears welled up again, but she forced them back. She couldn't afford to wallow in self-pity. Mrs. Morales returned with a pitcher of water and a basin. She helped Willow remove her dusty traveling clothes and wash her face and hands. "How far along?" the older woman asked directly as she poured Willow a cup of water. "About 4 months, I think," Willow admitted, seeing no point in denying what was obvious. Mrs. Morales nodded. "The father?" "Gone," Willow said tightly. "Back east." She didn't elaborate that William Harper had promised marriage before taking what he wanted and then disappearing with her modest savings when she told him about the baby. "Men," Mrs. Morales said with a sniff of disgust. "But Senor Preston is not like most. He is a good man." "Why would he help a stranger?" Willow couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "His sister died in childbirth 10 years ago," Mrs. Morales said softly. "Her husband had abandoned her, and she tried to make the journey home alone. Preston found her too late." The older woman crossed herself. "He has a soft heart for women in trouble since then." The explanation made Willow feel both better and worse. Better to know his motives appeared pure, worse to be the object of pity. "I won't stay long," she promised. "Just until I can figure out where to go next." Mrs. Morales merely shrugged, as if the future would unfold as it would, regardless of Willow's plans. The housekeeper brought a tray of food, a bowl of hearty stew, fresh bread, and sliced peaches. Willow hadn't realized how hungry she was until the aroma hit her. She ate everything, then fell into an exhausted sleep, still wearing the borrowed nightgown Mrs. Morales had provided. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the curtains. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back: her disgrace, her eviction, and the unexpected kindness of a stranger. She dressed in her own clothes, which someone had cleaned and pressed while she slept. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Preston seated at the kitchen table, going over some papers. He rose immediately. "Miss Lane, I hope you slept well." "Yes, thank you," she said, awkwardly aware of how much she owed this man already. "Mr. Irwin, I appreciate your hospitality, but I should be on my way." "And where will you go?" he asked mildly. The simple question left her speechless. She had no answer, and they both knew it. "I thought perhaps you might consider staying on for a while," Preston continued. "At least until the baby comes. Mrs. Morales could use some help with the house, and I'd be glad to compensate you for your work." Willow felt a flash of pride. "I was a school teacher, Mr. Irwin. I can earn my keep." "The ranch hands have children who could use some schooling," he replied. "Most of them can barely write their names. If you'd be willing to teach them a few hours each day, I'd consider it more than fair exchange for room and board." It was a generous offer, suspiciously so. "Why would you do this for me?" Preston set down the paper he'd been holding. "Miss Lane, I've lived in these parts my whole life. I've seen what happens to women alone in your condition. The world is not kind." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "I couldn't save my sister. Maybe I can help you." The simple honesty in his voice touched something deep inside her. "I don't want to be anyone's charity case or redemption." "It's not charity when both parties benefit," he said firmly. "And as for redemption, well, we all need that in one way or another, don't we?" Willow considered her options, which were painfully few. "Just until the baby comes," she agreed finally, "and I'll earn my keep." Preston nodded, his expression carefully neutral, but she thought she detected relief in his eyes. Then it settled. The next few days passed in a blur of adjustment. Willow took over a small room in an outbuilding that Preston had quickly converted into a makeshift schoolroom. 6 children, ranging in age from 7 to 14, became her pupils. They were a mixture of Mexican and white children, the sons and daughters of the ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse or small cabins scattered around the property. To her surprise, Willow found herself enjoying the work. These children were eager to learn, their faces lighting up with each new discovery. They asked no questions about her condition, accepting her presence with the matter-of-fact attitude of those who had grown up in the harsh realities of frontier life. Preston kept a respectful distance, but she often felt his eyes on her as she moved about the property or sat on the porch in the evenings. He was unfailingly polite, never intruding, yet always somehow present when she needed something. One evening, after the children had gone home and Willow was gathering her teaching materials, Preston appeared in the doorway of the schoolroom. "You're good with them," he observed. "Thank you," she said, pleased by the compliment. "They're bright children." "Most of them had never held a book before you came." Willow nodded, remembering her own privileged upbringing in Boston with its libraries and schools. "Education is a gift not everyone receives. Like kindness," he said quietly. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a moment of understanding that went beyond words. Willow felt her cheeks flush, and she busied herself with straightening the already neat stack of slates. "Will you join me for supper tonight?" Preston asked. "In the dining room, I mean, not just taking your meal in your room. Mrs. Morales has made her famous chili rellenos." The invitation surprised her. Though she lived in his house, their paths rarely crossed at mealtimes, a deliberate arrangement she suspected was meant to preserve her privacy and reputation. "I'd like that," she heard herself say. Dinner was surprisingly comfortable. Preston was well read for a rancher, and they discussed books they had both enjoyed. He told her about growing up in the territory, about the changes he'd seen as more settlers arrived and the railroad pushed ever westward. "My father started this ranch with just 20 head of cattle and a dream," he said, his voice warm with pride. "By the time he died, we had over 500 head and one of the most respected brands in the territory." "You've continued his legacy well," Willow observed, having seen enough of the operation to know it was prosperous and well managed. "I try," he said simply. "Though sometimes I think he'd have wanted more for me than just the ranch." "What do you mean?" Preston hesitated, then shrugged slightly. "A family of my own, I suppose. He was big on legacy, on passing things down through generations." The conversation had ventured into territory that made Willow uncomfortable, reminding her of her own precarious position. She changed the subject, asking about the drought that everyone said was threatening the territory. If Preston noticed her evasion, he didn't comment on it. The rest of the meal passed pleasantly, and by the time Mrs. Morales served coffee, Willow was more relaxed than she'd been in months. "Thank you for dinner," she said as they rose from the table, "and for everything." "It's nothing," he assured her. "I'm glad to have you here, Miss Lane." As May turned to June, Willow's condition became more pronounced. Mrs. Morales altered her dresses to accommodate her growing belly, and Preston arranged for Dr. Watkins from town to visit the ranch. "Just a precaution," he assured Willow when she protested the expense. "It's no trouble." The doctor, a gruff but kind older man, pronounced her healthy but advised rest in the heat of the day. "First babies can be tricky," he warned. "Best to be cautious." After the doctor left, Willow found Preston on the porch staring out at the distant mountains. "Thank you for calling the doctor," she said, joining him at the railing. "I promise to keep you safe," he reminded her. "That includes making sure you and the little one are healthy." The way he said, "the little one," made Willow's heart twist. So few people had acknowledged her baby as something precious, something to be celebrated rather than hidden away in shame. "Most people would have turned me away," she said softly. "An unmarried woman in my condition." "Most people are fools," Preston replied with unexpected vehemence. "A child is a blessing, no matter the circumstances." Willow studied his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the sincerity in his expression. "You're an unusual man, Preston Irwin." He turned to face her, his eyes serious. "And you, Willow Lane, are an extraordinary woman." The use of her first name, so intimate on his lips, made her breath catch. For a dangerous moment, she thought he might reach for her hand, might cross that invisible line they had both been so careful to maintain. Instead, he cleared his throat and stepped back slightly. "I should see to the north pasture. Miguel reported some fencing down after last night's storm." As he walked away, Willow pressed a hand to her rounded belly, feeling the flutter of movement within. "What do you think of him, little one?" she whispered. The baby responded with a kick that made her smile despite herself. The heat of summer descended on the New Mexico territory with brutal intensity. By July, temperatures soared, making the schoolroom stifling by midday. Preston solved the problem by moving lessons to early morning and setting up a canvas awning near the creek that ran through the property, where the children could learn in the relative cool beneath the cottonwood trees. On a particularly scorching afternoon, Willow retreated to her room for the siesta that had become her custom. She was awakened by the sound of horses in the yard and men's voices raised in argument. Curious, she went to the window. 3 riders had dismounted in front of the house. She recognized one immediately: Herbert Jenkins, the banker from Albuquerque who had once tried to court her before her disgrace. Preston stood facing the men, his stance relaxed but alert, one hand resting casually near the pistol at his hip. "I'm telling you, Irwin, she's here," Jenkins was saying, his nasal voice carrying clearly. "Folks in town are talking. Harboring a fallen woman doesn't reflect well on your reputation." "I don't much care what reflects on my reputation," Preston replied evenly. "And I'd thank you to leave my property." "That girl was meant to be my wife," Jenkins insisted. "I had intentions before she showed her true colors. Now I hear you've taken her in and the whole territory's laughing behind your back." Preston's voice remained calm, but Willow could see the tension in his shoulders. "Mr. Jenkins, what I do on my ranch is my business. Miss Lane is employed here as a teacher. That's all anyone needs to know." Jenkins laughed, an ugly sound. "A teacher? Is that what they call it these days?" One of the other men snickered, and Willow felt her face burn with humiliation. She had rejected Jenkins' advances repeatedly, finding him pompous and entitled. His wounded pride had clearly festered into something vengeful. "I won't ask you again to leave," Preston said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "The town council has concerns," Jenkins pressed. "A woman in her condition, living with an unmarried man, she lives under the supervision of my housekeeper," Preston cut him off. "And the town council has no jurisdiction over my ranch. Now, you can leave on your own or my men can help you." As if on cue, several ranch hands appeared from the stables and bunkhouse, their expressions unfriendly. Jenkins sputtered in indignation, but he and his companions remounted their horses. "This isn't over, Irwin," he called as they rode away. "That woman brings nothing but trouble." Preston watched until they disappeared down the trail, then turned toward the house. His eyes met Willow's at the window, and she stepped back, embarrassed to have been caught eavesdropping. A few minutes later, a soft knock sounded at her door. "Come in," she called, having hastily pinned up her hair and straightened her dress. Preston entered, removing his hat. "I apologize for that unpleasantness," he said. "Jenkins always was a blowhard." "You shouldn't have to defend me," Willow said, unable to meet his eyes. "Perhaps it would be better if I left." "And go where?" Preston asked, his voice gentle. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I can't keep causing problems for you." "Willow." The sound of her name made her look up. "You're not causing problems. Jenkins is a small man with a big mouth. I don't give a damn what he or anyone in town thinks." "But your reputation, my reputation, is my own concern," he interrupted firmly. "And I'd rather be known as a man who stands by his principles than one who bows to the judgment of fools." "What principles are those?" she asked quietly. Preston moved closer, close enough that she could smell the leather and sun on him. "That every person deserves kindness, that no one should face their troubles alone." He hesitated, then added more softly, "That you matter, Willow, you and your child." The simplicity of his words, the quiet conviction behind them, made her throat tight with emotion. "I don't know what I've done to deserve your kindness." "You don't have to deserve kindness," he said. "It should be given freely without condition." Impulsively, Willow reached out and touched his hand. "Thank you." He looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face. For a breathless moment she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he gently squeezed her fingers, then stepped back. "Get some rest," he said. "It's too hot for anything but siesta anyway." After he left, Willow sat on the edge of her bed, her hand still tingling from his touch. It was foolish, she knew, to feel this flutter in her heart for Preston. She was carrying another man's child, her reputation was in tatters, and she had nothing to offer a man like him. Yet as she laid back down, she allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to belong here permanently, to be more than just an employee or a charity case. To be wanted. The dream was sweet but painful, like pressing on a bruise. Some things were not meant to be, no matter how much the heart might wish otherwise. The arrival of a letter in mid-August disrupted the routine that had developed at the ranch. Willow was resting on the porch, her swollen ankles propped on a stool, when the weekly mail rider delivered the envelope addressed to her in a familiar hand. Her heart pounded as she broke the seal. The letter was from William Harper, the father of her child. "My dearest Willow," it began, the endearment making her stomach churn with revulsion. "I have recently learned of your condition and felt compelled to write. My circumstances have changed, and I find myself in a position to do right by you and our child. I am currently in Denver, but will arrive in Albuquerque by the end of the month. I hope we might discuss our future together." The letter continued with flowery apologies and protestations of regret, but Willow barely registered the words. William wanted to do right by her. After abandoning her, stealing her savings, and leaving her to face disgrace alone, Preston found her still clutching the letter, her face pale. "Bad news?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "The baby's father," she said, her voice wooden. "He's coming to Albuquerque. He wants to make things right." Preston's expression remained carefully neutral. "I see, and what do you want?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked what she wanted in a very long time. "I don't know," she admitted. "I thought he was gone for good. Now he says his circumstances have changed. I suspect that means he's found money somewhere and thinks he can buy his way back into my good graces. Will you see him?" Willow stared out at the landscape. She had come to love the rugged beauty of the hills, the clarity of the New Mexico sky. "I don't know," she repeated. "Part of me says I should for the baby's sake. Another part never wants to lay eyes on William Harper again." Preston nodded thoughtfully. "You don't have to decide today," he said. "And whatever you choose, you have a place here for as long as you want it." The simple reassurance meant more than he could know. "Thank you," she said softly. That night, Willow couldn't sleep. The baby was restless, kicking and squirming as if sharing her disquiet. She eventually gave up and made her way to the kitchen for a glass of milk. To her surprise, Preston was already there, shirt sleeves rolled up, nursing a cup of coffee despite the late hour. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, rising to pull out a chair for her. "The baby's doing somersaults," she explained, easing her bulk into the chair. Preston fetched her a glass of milk from the spring house without being asked. As he set it before her, his hand brushed hers, sending that now familiar warmth through her veins. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, resuming his seat across from her. "William's letter," she admitted. "And what I should do?" Preston nodded but said nothing, giving her space to work through her thoughts. "If I were just making a decision for myself, I'd never see him again," she said finally. "But there's the baby to consider. A child should have a father." "A child should have love," Preston corrected gently. "Sometimes that comes from a father, sometimes it doesn't. You think I shouldn't see him? I think," he said carefully, "that you shouldn't feel obligated to give a man a second chance just because he fathered your child. The question is whether he deserves to be in your life and in your child's life." "And if I decide he doesn't?" Willow asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then you move forward without him," Preston said simply. "You're stronger than you think, Willow Lane." She looked into his eyes, searching for judgment or hidden motives, but found only sincerity and something else, something that made her heart beat faster. "Preston," she began, not sure what she wanted to say, only that something needed to be said. Before she could continue, a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen, causing her to gasp and clutch the table edge. Preston was immediately at her side. "What is it?" "I don't know," she managed through clenched teeth. A pain, another contraction seized her, stronger than the first. "But it's too early," she said, panic rising in her throat. "The baby isn't due for weeks." Preston's face was grim but calm. "First babies come when they want to, not when they're expected," he said, repeating what Dr. Watkins had told them. "Let's get you back to bed. I'll send for the doctor." He helped her to her room, then roused Mrs. Morales and dispatched a ranch hand to fetch Dr. Watkins from town. The next hours passed in a blur of pain for Willow as her labor progressed with frightening speed. Mrs. Morales stayed by her side, her experienced hands checking the baby's position, her calm voice offering reassurance. But as dawn approached with still no sign of the doctor, Willow saw the worry in the older woman's eyes. "Something's wrong," Willow gasped between contractions. "Isn't it, Mrs.?" Morales patted her hand. "The baby is turned a little wrong, Nina, but we will manage." Preston paced outside the door, refusing to leave despite Mrs. Morales's insistence that childbirth was women's business. When Willow's screams grew more desperate, he could stand it no longer and entered the room. "What can I do?" he asked, his face pale but determined. Mrs. Morales opened her mouth to send him away, then seemed to reconsider. "Hold her hand," she instructed. "Give her something to grip when the pain comes." Preston knelt beside the bed, taking Willow's hand in both of his. "I'm here," he said softly. "You're not alone." Willow clutched his hand as another contraction tore through her. "I'm scared," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I know," he said. "But you're the strongest woman I've ever met, Willow Lane. You can do this." For the next hour, Preston remained at her side, wiping her brow, letting her crush his fingers with each contraction and murmuring encouragement. When the baby finally slipped into the world with a lusty cry, the sun was just cresting the distant mountains. "A boy," Mrs. Morales announced, quickly wrapping the infant in a clean cloth. "A strong, healthy boy." She placed the tiny bundle in Willow's arms. Exhausted but overwhelmed with love, Willow gazed down at her son's scrunched red face. "He's perfect," she whispered. Preston's eyes were suspiciously bright as he looked down at mother and child. "What will you name him?" he asked softly. Willow hesitated only briefly. "Matthew," she decided. "Matthew Lane." She deliberately did not use William's surname, a small act of defiance that felt right in her heart. "Matthew," Preston repeated. "It's a good name." Dr. Watkins arrived an hour later, red-faced and apologetic for his delay. He examined both mother and baby, pronouncing them remarkably well despite the early arrival and difficult birth. "You're a lucky woman, Miss Lane," he said. "Not every birth with a turned baby ends so happily." After the doctor left, Mrs. Morales shooed Preston from the room so Willow could rest. But before he went, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I'm proud of you," he murmured. "Now rest. You've earned it." In the days that followed, Willow discovered the exhausting joy of new motherhood. Matthew was a voracious eater, and seemed determined to make his presence known with lusty cries at all hours. Mrs. Morales was an invaluable help, showing Willow how to bathe and swaddle the infant, and offering remedies for his occasional colic. Preston kept a respectful distance, but made sure Willow had everything she needed. Fresh flowers appeared daily on her bedside table, and he brought books for her to read during the long hours of nursing. A week after Matthew's birth, Willow was sitting on the porch with the baby, enjoying the cooler evening air when Preston joined her. "He's growing already," Preston observed, smiling down at the sleeping infant. "Like a weed," Willow agreed. "Mrs. Morales says he has a hearty appetite." Preston settled into the chair beside her. "Willow, there's something I need to tell you." The seriousness in his tone made her look up sharply. "What is it?" "William Harper is in Albuquerque," he said. "He came to the ranch today while you were napping. I spoke with him." Willow's arms tightened instinctively around her son. "What did he want?" "What he said in his letter to make things right. He asked to see you and the baby." "And what did you tell him?" Her voice was steady, but her heart raced. "I told him that was your decision to make, not mine." Preston hesitated, then added, "But I also told him that if he came here with anything less than honorable intentions, he'd answer to me." The protective fierceness in his voice warmed her, even as anxiety knotted in her stomach at the thought of facing William again. "I don't want to see him," she said firmly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." Preston nodded, looking relieved. "I'll convey your wishes if he returns." They sat in companionable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Matthew slept peacefully in Willow's arms, his tiny face relaxed in perfect trust. "I've been thinking," Preston said eventually, "about the future." "What about it?" Willow asked, suddenly nervous. Was he going to suggest it was time for her to move on? Now that the baby was here, perhaps he felt his obligation fulfilled. "I know we haven't known each other long," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "And I know your life has been complicated enough without adding more complications." He took a deep breath. "But I can't pretend I don't have feelings for you, Willow, strong feelings." Her heart seemed to stop, then restart with a painful thud. "Preston, you don't have to say anything," he rushed on. "I know it's too soon and you have Matthew to think about. I just wanted you to know where I stand. That if you ever thought you might feel the same way, I would be honored to court you properly." Willow looked down at her son, then back at the man who had become her protector, her friend, and perhaps something more. "I do have feelings for you," she admitted softly. "But you're right, it's complicated. Matthew isn't your son." "He could be," Preston said simply, "in all the ways that matter." The offer took her breath away. "You would raise another man's child as your own." "I would raise your child as my own," he corrected, "because he's part of you and I." He paused, then finished in a near whisper, "I love you, Willow." Tears filled her eyes at the words she had never expected to hear again, especially not from a man as good as Preston Irwin. "You don't have to answer now," he assured her, reaching over to gently touch Matthew's downy head. "Just think about it. We have time." But Willow didn't need time. In that moment, with her son in her arms and this remarkable man beside her, the future suddenly seemed clear and bright. "I love you too," she said, the words rushing out before fear could silence them. "I think I have for a while now." Preston's smile lit his entire face. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, sweet kiss that held the promise of many more to come. When they parted, Willow was smiling through her tears. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Preston said, taking her free hand in his, "we build a life together if that's what you want." "It is," she assured him. "More than anything." The sound of approaching horses interrupted their moment. Willow tensed, thinking of William, but Preston squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Probably just the hands coming in for supper," he said, rising to look out toward the trail. But his expression darkened as he recognized the riders. "Jenkins," he muttered. "And it looks like he's brought the sheriff this time." Willow's heart sank. Herbert Jenkins had made good on his threat to cause trouble, apparently. "Stay here," Preston instructed, striding down the porch steps to meet the approaching men. Sheriff Thomas Caldwell was a fair man, known for his even-handedness, but he looked uncomfortable as he dismounted beside an obviously pleased Jenkins. "Preston," the sheriff greeted. "I hate to bother you, but Mr. Jenkins here has raised some concerns about the welfare of a child on your property." "Has he now?" Preston's voice was dangerously quiet. "Claims there's an unwed mother living herein." "Inappropriate circumstances," the sheriff continued, clearly disliking his role as messenger. "Sheriff, you've known me my entire life," Preston said evenly. "Have I ever given you reason to question my character?" "No, you haven't," Caldwell admitted. "But when accusations are made, I have to investigate, you understand." Jenkins smirked triumphantly. "The law is clear about moral fitness in the care of children." "A bastard born to a fallen woman, living with an unrelated man—" "That's enough," Preston cut him off, his hand drifting toward his gun. "It's all right, Preston," Willow called, rising from her chair with Matthew in her arms. She descended the steps to join him, holding her head high despite her racing heart. "Sheriff Caldwell can see for himself that my son is well cared for." The sheriff's eyes softened as he took in the healthy baby and the protective stance of the woman holding him. "Miss Lane, I presume?" "Yes, sir." "Madam, I have no personal interest in your arrangements here," Caldwell said quietly. "But Mr. Jenkins has made a formal complaint, and there are certain expectations in society regarding children born out of wedlock. "There won't be any issue with that, Sheriff," Preston interjected, "because Miss Lane has agreed to become my wife." Willow's head snapped around to stare at him. They had discussed their feelings, yes, but not marriage, at least not explicitly. Preston's eyes met hers, silently asking if his declaration was acceptable. After a heartbeat's hesitation, she nodded, her smile answering his unspoken question. "Is that so?" the sheriff asked, looking relieved at this simple solution. "It is," Willow confirmed, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. Jenkins sputtered in outrage. "This is clearly a convenient fiction to avoid, Mr. Jenkins," the sheriff interrupted. "Unless you have actual evidence of wrongdoing, I suggest you drop this matter. A child raised by married parents in a stable home is exactly what the law prefers." "When's the wedding?" Jenkins demanded, still suspicious. "Next Sunday," Preston answered promptly. "You're welcome to attend, Jenkins, though I can't imagine why you'd want to." The banker's face flushed with anger, but he had no further legal ground to stand on. With a terse nod to the sheriff, he remounted his horse and rode off without another word. Sheriff Caldwell lingered a moment longer. "Congratulations to you both," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I'll see myself off now." When they were alone again, Willow turned to Preston. "Next Sunday?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. He had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Too soon. I can go after the sheriff and tell him it will be longer if you need more time." "No," she said, surprising herself with her certainty. "Next Sunday is perfect." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I should have asked properly," he said, suddenly dropping to one knee before her and Matthew. "Willow Lane, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will." The week that followed passed in a flurry of preparations. Word spread quickly about the upcoming wedding, and to Willow's surprise, many of the neighboring ranchers and their families sent notes of congratulation. It seemed Preston was well respected enough that his choice of bride, unconventional as it might be, was accepted by most. Mrs. Morales transformed into a whirlwind of activity, directing the ranch hands in cleaning and decorating the house and yard, and spending hours in the kitchen preparing food for the celebration. She also took Willow's best dress and cleverly altered it to fit her post-pregnancy figure, adding lace from her own cherished mantilla to create a wedding gown of surprising elegance. The day before the wedding, a visitor arrived whom Willow had been half expecting, half dreading. William Harper rode up to the ranch house shortly after noon, his city clothes and polished boots looking out of place in the rustic setting. Preston was out checking cattle, but Mrs. Morales immediately came to stand protectively at Willow's side as she received William on the porch, Matthew sleeping in a cradle nearby. "Willow," William began, his handsome face arranged in an expression of contrition that she now recognized as wholly false. "You look well." "What do you want, William?" she asked directly, seeing no point in pleasantries. He glanced at Mrs. Morales, clearly hoping for privacy, but the housekeeper folded her arms and made no move to leave. "I came to make things right," he said, returning his attention to Willow. "I've had some success in Denver, significant success, actually. I'm in a position now to provide for you and the child. His name is Matthew," Willow said coldly, "and we don't need your provision." William's eyes narrowed slightly. "He's my son, Willow. I have rights." "Rights?" She nearly choked on the word. "You abandoned us. You stole my savings. You left me to face disgrace alone. What rights do you imagine you have?" "I've made mistakes," he conceded, his tone reasonable, "but I want to correct them. I've heard you're marrying this rancher, Irwin. Is that wise? Rushing into marriage with a man you barely know?" I know Preston Irwin better after 3 months than I knew you after a year, Willow replied. And unlike you, he has proven himself trustworthy and honorable. William's pleasant mask slipped, revealing the calculation beneath. Be sensible, Willow. I can offer Matthew advantages this cattle baron never could: education, connections, a place in society. What Matthew needs is love and stability, she countered. Preston offers both. And what about you? William pressed. What do you need? I need a man I can trust, Willow said simply. That isn't you, William. It never was. The sound of hoofbeats announced Preston's return. William's expression darkened as the rancher dismounted and strode toward them, his face grim but controlled. Harper, Preston acknowledged with a curt nod. I see you've met my fiancée. We're just catching up on old times, William replied with forced lightness. I was explaining to Willow that I'm in a position now to provide for her and my son. Our son, Willow corrected, moving to stand beside Preston. And as I've told you, we don't need anything from you. William's charm vanished entirely now, his handsome face hardening into something ugly. You can't keep my child from me. Actually, she can, Preston said quietly. You abandoned them both. Under territorial law, that constitutes desertion. You have no legal claim unless Willow chooses to grant you one. This isn't over, William snarled, reverting to the true character Willow had glimpsed only after it was too late. I'll be back with lawyers. You do that, Preston replied evenly. But know this, Harper, if you try to take that boy from his mother, you'll have to go through me first. The two men stared at each other for a tense moment before William backed down, turning on his heel and stalking to his horse. You'll regret this, he called over his shoulder as he mounted. Both of you. They watched him ride away, and Willow found herself trembling slightly with the aftermath of confrontation. Preston put his arm around her shoulders. Are you all right? He asked softly. Yes, she said, leaning into his strength. I just never thought I'd have to face him again. Do you think he'll really come back with lawyers? Willow considered the question, thinking of the William she had come to know, a man who made grand threats but rarely followed through when it required actual effort or expense. No, she decided. He doesn't really want Matthew. He just hates the idea of losing something he considers his. Preston nodded, his expression relieved. Well, after tomorrow, Matthew will be my son in the eyes of the law as well as my heart. Harper can hire every lawyer in the territory, and it won't change that. The simple certainty in his voice reassured Willow more than elaborate promises could have. Preston was a man of his word, and tomorrow she would become his wife. Sunday dawned clear and bright, a perfect late summer day in the New Mexico territory. The ranch was transformed, with lanterns strung across the yard, tables set up beneath the cottonwood trees, and wildflowers arranged in mason jars on every available surface. Willow stood in her room, Mrs. Morales fussing with the last details of her wedding dress, when a knock sounded at the door. You can't come in, Senor Preston, Mrs. Morales called. It's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding. It's not Preston, a woman's voice answered. It's Eliza Caldwell, the sheriff's wife. Mrs. Morales opened the door to reveal a plump, pleasant-faced woman holding a small box. I hope I'm not intruding, Eliza said, smiling warmly at Willow. But I wanted to bring you this. Every bride should have something borrowed. She opened the box to reveal a delicate pearl hairpin. It was my mother's, she explained. I wore it at my own wedding 20 years ago. Willow was touched by the gesture from this woman she had never met. That's very kind of you, Mrs. Caldwell. Please call me Eliza, the woman insisted, coming forward to tuck the hairpin into Willow's upswept hair. There, perfect. Thank you, Willow said sincerely. It means a great deal to me that you would share this. Eliza patted her hand. Preston Irwin is one of the finest men in the territory, she said. Thomas the sheriff has known him since they were boys. He couldn't be happier about this match. The simple acceptance from this respectable woman eased some lingering anxiety in Willow's heart. Perhaps there was a place for her in this community after all. At noon, Willow walked across the ranch yard on the sheriff's arm, Matthew being carried by a beaming Mrs. Morales just behind them. Preston waited beneath an arch of wildflowers, looking handsome and slightly nervous in his best suit. The ranch hands and their families, along with neighboring ranchers and several townspeople, stood watching the procession with smiles and a few happy tears. The circuit preacher, who visited Albuquerque once a month, conducted the simple ceremony. When Preston slipped a gold band onto Willow's finger, his mother's ring, he had told her and promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life. She knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Preston's kiss was tender but filled with promise, and the cheers of their assembled guests wrapped around them like a blessing. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with fiddle music, dancing, and more food than Willow had seen in one place since leaving Boston. Preston seemed to never leave her side, his hand finding hers again and again, as if reassuring himself that she was truly his wife. As the sun began to set, Sheriff Caldwell approached them, his expression unusually serious for such a festive occasion. "Preston, Willow," he greeted. "Beautiful ceremony, but I'm afraid I have some news that can't wait." Preston tensed beside her. "What is it, Thomas?" "William Harper left town this morning," the sheriff said. "But before he did, he was making some ugly threats at the saloon. Nothing specific enough for me to hold him on, but I thought you should know." "Thank you for telling us," Preston said, his arm tightening protectively around Willow's waist. "We'll keep an eye out." The sheriff nodded. "I've got deputies watching the road to the ranch just in case, but I don't think he'll be back soon. Word is he was headed to Santa Fe." After the sheriff moved on, Willow looked up at her new husband. "Do you think William will cause more trouble?" Preston considered the question carefully. "Men like Harper usually make a lot of noise but back down when faced with real opposition," he said finally. "But we'll be vigilant, just the same." Mrs. Morales approached with Matthew, who had begun to fuss. "I think this little man wants his mama," she said, handing the baby to Willow. Looking down at her son, then up at her husband, Willow felt a fierce surge of protectiveness. No one, not William Harper, not Herbert Jenkins, not anyone would threaten the happiness she had found. "We'll be fine," she said with quiet certainty. "All of us together." The festivities gradually wound down as guests departed with final congratulations and well wishes. When the last visitor had gone, Preston scooped Matthew from Willow's arms. "Time for this young man to get some sleep," he said, cradling the baby with surprising ease for a man who had never had children of his own. Together they put Matthew down in the cradle that had been moved to what was now their bedroom. The baby settled quickly, exhausted from the excitement of the day. Alone at last, Preston took Willow's hands in his. "Happy, Mrs. Irwin?" he asked softly. The name, her new name, sent a thrill through her. "Very happy, Mr. Irwin," she assured him. "I meant what I said in my vows," he told her, his eyes serious. "I will spend every day trying to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me." "And I meant what I said," she replied. "I will love you faithfully, all the days of my life." As Preston drew her into his arms, Willow marveled at the journey that had brought her here from disgrace and desperation to love and belonging. In this man's embrace, she had found not just safety, but home. The weeks following the wedding settled into a new routine at the Irwin Ranch. Willow resumed teaching the children in the mornings, now with Matthew nestled in a basket nearby. Preston threw himself into preparations for the coming winter, ensuring the cattle had access to sheltered areas and that sufficient hay was stored. In October, the first snow dusted the mountain peaks visible from their bedroom window. Willow stood watching the sunrise paint the white-capped mountains pink and gold, Matthew nursing contentedly at her breast when Preston came up behind her and wrapped his arms around them both. "Beautiful sight," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Which one?" she asked with a smile. "The mountains or your son?" "All three," he replied. "The mountains, my son, and my wife." The easy way he claimed Matthew as his own never failed to warm her heart. In the 2 months since their wedding, Preston had proven himself a devoted father, spending hours with the baby, talking to him, showing him the ranch, already planning all he would teach him as he grew. "I was thinking," Preston said, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Matthew should have brothers and sisters, don't you think, when the time is right?" Willow turned in his arms to face him. "Are you saying you want more children, Mr. Irwin? With you, Mrs. Irwin?" His eyes crinkled at the corners. "I want a dozen," she laughed. "Perhaps we should start with one more and see how we feel after that." "A sensible approach," he agreed, bending to kiss her. "But we could certainly practice in the meantime." The happiness of those early months of marriage was occasionally shadowed by reminders of the threats that still lingered. In November, they received word that William Harper had indeed hired a lawyer in Santa Fe and was exploring his options for claiming parental rights to Matthew. "He won't succeed," Preston assured Willow after sharing the news. "Our marriage and my adoption of Matthew are legally binding. Harper abandoned you both. No court will side with him." Willow tried to believe him, but anxiety nagged at her. "What if he claims I kept the baby from him? That he didn't know until it was too late?" "Then he'd be lying," Preston said firmly. "And we have witnesses who can testify that he knew about your condition and chose to leave anyway." Despite his reassurances, Preston took the threat seriously enough to ride into Albuquerque and consult with a lawyer of his own. He returned looking relieved. "Harper doesn't have a case," he reported. "Our lawyer says his claim wouldn't stand up in any court in the territory. It's just another empty threat." As winter settled over the New Mexico territory, the ranch became a cozy haven from the cold. The schoolroom was moved inside the house, and the children crowded around the fire as Willow taught them to read and write. Matthew grew stronger each day, his personality emerging stubborn like his mother, Mrs. Morales declared, but with Preston's easy smile. Christmas approached, and Willow found herself happier than she had been in years. The ranch hands and their families gathered in the main house on Christmas Eve for a feast and gift exchange. Matthew, now nearly 6 months old, was passed from arms to arms, adored by all, especially the older Mexican women who declared him precioso, and predicted he would grow to be as tall and strong as his papa. Preston presented Willow with a beautiful leather-bound journal. "For your thoughts and dreams," he said as she ran her fingers over the embossed cover. "And maybe someday, for stories to share with our children." Her gift to him was more modest, a hand-knitted scarf in the deep blue that matched his eyes. "To keep you warm on the winter range," she said as she wrapped it around his neck. "You keep me warm," he corrected, pulling her close for a kiss that earned good-natured teasing from the assembled ranch families. New Year's Day 1876 dawned bright and cold. Preston and Willow stood on the porch, watching the sun rise on the centennial year of their nation, Matthew bundled warmly between them. "What do you wish for this year?" Preston asked, his breath making clouds in the frosty air. Willow considered the question seriously. "Peace," she decided. For our family to live in peace. Preston nodded. A worthy wish, and one I intend to make come true. February brought heavy snows that isolated the ranch for several weeks. The enforced confinement might have been difficult, but Willow found she enjoyed the quiet days with her husband and son, reading by the fire, playing with Matthew on a blanket spread before the hearth, sharing long conversations late into the night. It was during one of these snowbound evenings that Willow realized she was late. Mrs. Morales confirmed her suspicions with a knowing smile and a tea made from herbs that she swore would ease the morning sickness that had begun to plague Willow. When she told Preston, his face lit with such joy that tears sprang to her eyes. "Another baby," he whispered, laying his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." The distinction was unspoken, but clear this child would be biologically his in a way that Matthew was not. But the love in his eyes as he looked from her face to where Matthew played on the floor made it equally clear that in his heart there was no difference between the children. "Happy?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he assured her, gathering her into his arms. When spring finally melted the snows, bringing wildflowers and new calves to the ranch, a letter arrived bearing the seal of a Santa Fe law firm. Willow's hands shook as she handed it to Preston. He read it quickly, his expression shifting from concern to relief. "Harper has withdrawn his claim," he announced. "According to this, he's accepted a position with a banking firm in San Francisco and has signed papers relinquishing all parental rights to Matthew." Just like that. Willow could hardly believe it. "After all his threats," Preston shrugged. "Men like Harper are always chasing the next opportunity. San Francisco probably offers better prospects than fighting a legal battle he was bound to lose." He set the letter aside. "What matters is that it's over. Matthew is officially and legally our son, with no shadows hanging over his future." The relief was overwhelming. That night, after Matthew was asleep, Willow and Preston sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the vast New Mexico sky. "You ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Taking in a pregnant stranger, becoming father to another man's child?" Preston looked at her in surprise. "Not for a single moment," he said firmly. "Meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me, Willow. You and Matthew gave me the family I always wanted." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "And soon there will be one more." "The first of many," he predicted with a smile. In late October 1876, just as the aspens in the mountains turned golden, Willow gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named James Preston Irwin. Matthew, now walking and beginning to talk, regarded his little brother with a mixture of curiosity and pride, solemnly declaring "my baby" whenever visitors came to see the new arrival. As Willow watched Preston with their sons, one dark-haired like her, one with Preston's sandy brown hair, she marveled at how completely he had embraced fatherhood. There was never any difference in how he treated the boys, never any hint that Matthew was not his flesh and blood. Life on the ranch continued to flourish. The cattle business prospered under Preston's careful management, allowing for improvements to the house and property. The schoolroom was expanded to accommodate more children as neighboring ranchers asked if their children might also benefit from Willow's teaching. By the time James was 2 and Matthew nearly 3, Willow discovered she was expecting their third child. Preston's prediction of a large family seemed well on its way to coming true. "A girl this time, I think," Preston said one evening as they sat by the fire, the boys already asleep in their beds. "What makes you so sure?" Willow asked, amused by his confidence. "Just a feeling," he replied with a wink. "And I'm always right, aren't I?" She laughed and threw a cushion at him. "Insufferably so, sometimes." He caught the cushion easily and moved to kneel beside her chair, his hand coming to rest on the gentle swell of her belly. "I love you, Willow Irwin," he said softly. "More each day." "And I love you," she replied, cupping his cheek. "More than I once thought possible." In May of 1878, Sarah Elizabeth Irwin was born with a full head of her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes. Preston was so besotted with his daughter that the ranch hands teased him mercilessly about being wrapped around her tiny finger. "She'll be a beauty like her mother," he declared proudly as he showed her off to visitors. As the children grew, the ranch expanded to become one of the most successful operations in the territory. Preston's progressive ranching methods and fair treatment of his workers earned him respect throughout the region, while Willow's school gained a reputation for excellence that drew students from as far as Albuquerque. One warm afternoon in the summer of 1885, as Willow watched her 3 children playing in the yard, Matthew, now 10, and already showing signs of becoming as tall as Preston, 7-year-old James, who had his father's way with horses, and little Sarah, a precocious 5-year-old who could already read better than many of the older children in the school, she felt a contentment so deep it almost brought tears to her eyes. Preston joined her on the porch, following her gaze to their children. "Look what we've built together," he said softly, his arms slipping around her waist. "A family," she replied, leaning into him. "A home." "More than that," he corrected gently. "A legacy of love." As the sun began to set over the New Mexico hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Willow reflected on the journey that had brought her here from a frightened, pregnant young woman facing scorn and rejection, to a wife, mother, and respected teacher. All because one good man had seen past her circumstances to the woman she truly was, had promised to keep her safe, and had kept that promise every day since. "What are you thinking?" Preston asked, noticing her pensive expression. "About the day we met," she answered. "When you found me on the road outside Albuquerque." He smiled at the memory. "Best day of my life, though I didn't know it then." "You promised to keep me safe," she reminded him. "Do you remember?" "I remember every word," he assured her, "and I meant every one." "You've kept that promise," she said softly, "in more ways than I could have imagined." As their children's laughter floated up from the yard, mingling with the evening songs of meadowlarks and the distant lowing of cattle, Preston bent to kiss his wife with all the tenderness of their first kiss and all the certainty of their years together. "Always," he promised again. "Always." And in the gathering twilight of the New Mexico territory, as stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the Irwin family, built on courage, sustained by love, and bound together by promises, kept, welcomed another evening in the home they had created together.